Hey, how's it going? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Gabby, and today we're going to be doing my December wrap-up. And in the month of December, I read 25 books, which is actually the most books that I've ever read in the month of December. I feel like usually December is a month where I tend to read less than normal, but for some reason this year, it was actually my second highest reading month of the entire year, which is really interesting. And I did have a few books that I DNF'd in the month of December. I did end up DNFing the book The Names. I got 85 pages into this one before I decided to DNF, and I was actually DNFing so many books this month that I decided to scrap an entire video that I was working on because I was trying to do another round of like the Goodreads Choice Awards, and this was one of the books that I was going to be reading for that video. Unfortunately, this book just felt a little bit like repetitive to me, and I just really didn't care about the characters, even though the premise for this one sounds like it could be my dream book. And then also for that same video, I ended up DNFing We Are All Guilty Here by Karen Slaughter, as well as Cursed Daughters. You know, the new Karen Slaughter is one that maybe I should have known this wouldn't really be for me because this one is actually like a detective type of thriller. I got really far into this. I got 161 pages into this before I decided to DNF. I just don't think that this is like the thriller for me. And the Cursed Daughters is one that I think I could enjoy if I pick it up at another time. So I think this is like a temporary DNF for now. I think the concept for this book is really fascinating. I just think this was a little bit like heavy and not exactly what I was in the mood for because it is a little bit outside of my comfort zone. And because, you know, I mentioned I was really going through it in the month of December, like with my personal stuff with my family, like it just wasn't a really great month for me. And so I do think I'm going to come back to this one at a later time. And then I also decided to temporarily DNF Every Step She Takes. I did get pretty far into this one too. I got 118 pages in, and I was really enjoying this book at the start of it. I just wasn't feeling super motivated to like come back to this audiobook and keep listening to it. And I think it's because I realized I really don't like the audiobook narration very much. So I might try to come back to this one and read it physically later when I'm more in the mood for this. I also did work on 2 exclusive videos for Patreon in the month of December. One of them was like a 2025 favorites video, which is something I love to do at the end of every year. And it's kind of to talk about all of my favorite things outside of books. So I talk about movies, TV shows, music, food, clothes, like different products, like all kinds of things. And I have a lot of fun making those. And then I also posted a monthly vlog over to my Patreon that includes everything from like mid-November all the way up to Christmas. So it includes like Thanksgiving when I had family visiting and just like a whole bunch of stuff. You know, something crazy too about my reading month this month is that I read 6 nonfiction books this month, which is actually wild because I'm pretty sure for like the entire year, I only read like 8 or 9 nonfiction books for the entire year, and I read 6 of them in December. I think it's because like when I was going through something hard in December, it was really hard for me to like focus on fictional stuff, so I was more easily able to focus on nonfiction books. Anyway, let's jump right into all the books I read because we have a lot to get through, and as always, I'm going to be starting with my lowest rated books of the month and then working my way up to the highest rated. I actually had a really great reading month though because I only had one book that I gave 2 stars, and that was How to Read a Book. You know, I was really excited this year to do this vlog where I read books about bookstores inside of bookstores. I'll have that vlog linked down below if you missed it, but this was definitely the biggest disappointment from that vlog. And just in general, like that vlog did not really go as well as I was hoping, to be honest. Like I didn't find any new favorites in that video, but this one especially just kind of like baffled me with like why people are loving this book so much. And to be honest, for a book that's called How to Read a Book, I don't really think that this was that much about books. This is the type of story that kind of feels like a literary fiction, and we're following these 3 different characters who are leading these 3 very different lives, and then they all connect one day in a bookstore. But I think the story is really about like forgiveness and like showing kindness to others. But I don't know, there was something about this that really just didn't work for me, and I thought it was so boring, and I was like, why are there so many scenes about this parrot? It was just so random. So this was the only 2-star book that I had this month, and definitely the worst thing that I read in December, but I seem to have the unpopular opinion because this one has really high average ratings on Goodreads, and a lot of people seem to be loving this. I also had 2 3-star books that came out of that same video. I read Storybook Ending as well as The In-Between Bookstore. Both of these books were books that had a lot of potential for me, but they both ended up being pretty disappointing for different reasons. I thought this book had such a unique premise because we're basically following this character who's going back to the small town where he grew up, and he used to work at this bookstore called The In-Between Bookstore, and when he goes to the bookstore in his small town, he comes face to face with his younger self, and this character is trans, and he's meeting himself before he transitioned. I thought that premise was so cool, and I kind of love books that involve like kind of time travel elements like this, but I just left this book feeling very underwhelmed and kind of like confused on how I was supposed to feel. I don't think that the cool magical element in this book was used to its full potential. And then with Storybook Ending, this is one that I also thought had some really great potential because we have these characters and they get kind of accidentally set up into this like love triangle kind of a situation because we have this one one woman who sees this guy who's working in the bookstore and she thinks that he's a total hottie. And so she leaves him a note in one of the books and she leaves it thinking that he's gonna read it. But then this other woman who comes into the bookstore finds the note and she assumes that the guy that's working at the bookstore left it for her. Both of the women think that it's the guy in the bookstore who's leaving the notes when in reality, they're just exchanging letters with each other. This had the potential to be so fun and so messy, but this book was actually like incredibly boring and it just never went anywhere interesting for me. And even though I like that you're getting all three characters' perspectives in this book, it kind of felt pointless to get the guy's perspective in this because he has no idea what the fuck's going on. So this ended up being a pretty forgettable read, which is really sad because the premise sounded so fun. And then speaking of books and bookstores, I also got a chance to read the nonfiction book called Every Day I Read. This is one that I just heard about recently and I was so excited because this is actually the same author as Welcome to the Hyunamdong Bookshop, which if you just missed my best books of the year video, that was my number 3 favorite book of the year. And so I had to run to go listen to this on audio when I found out that this book existed because I was like, oh my god, this same author writing about why we love to read and why books are amazing in a nonfiction book. And this audiobook was a really short one. I think it was only like 3 to 4 hours long. It was a very quick read, but unfortunately I only ended up giving this one 3 stars. I really loved the first half of this, kind of talking about like why we as readers pick up books to begin with. And it was actually like a really beautiful reminder for like why we love reading in the first place. But then I really feel like the second half of this book kind of went off the rails and it felt more like the author was trying to like push you to read certain classic books that they deem as like the best literature. It just seemed like it was trying to push the message of like you need to be reading things of substance in order to be like valued as a reader. I don't know, I think the message got a little bit lost for me in the second half and I was kind of like, wait, what? And I wasn't enjoying it as much as the first half, so I ended up giving this one only 3 stars. I did read a few different romances this month that I only ended up giving 3 stars to. One of them was Secret Nights and Northern Lights by Megan Oliver. Oh my gosh, I love this cover. It's so beautiful. I love the way the sky looks. And something that I did love about this book is that it's mostly taking place in Iceland, which is so cool and like such an amazing setting. This one is actually about these two characters who were not only childhood best friends, but they were also each other's first loves. And now they're going to be seeing each other again after so many years apart because they're going to be working together on this work trip to Iceland. And basically she works as like a journalist for a travel magazine and then he's a photographer. There were some things that I absolutely loved about this. Like I really did find our main protagonist Mona in this book. I thought she was so relatable most of the time. I'm just so torn on this book because there were a lot of things that I loved about it and I really did love the Iceland setting. I don't know if I've ever read a book that takes place in Iceland, but it was just so magical and it made me want to travel. Like it definitely gave me that feeling. I also just loved the writing in this book in general. Like I'm definitely going to read more from this romance author in the future. And it also just cracked me up because the first opening line of chapter 1 says, "There's a cold hard truth no one mentions about turning 31. Nobody cares, yourself included. The youthful romanticism of one's 20s has passed." And she just goes on this tangent about how much it sucks to turn 31. And I was like, you know what? This is hilarious because in January, I'm going to be turning 31. And so I just instantly found her to be very relatable. I just wish I cared more about the romance in this book. And this also could be because I'm not the biggest fan of second chance romances. So maybe that's why it didn't really work for me. But I do want to read more from this author because I really did like the writing in general. I also ended up reading The Odds of You by Kate Dramis. And this one is actually an ARC copy that I have. And this one goes on sale early in January next month. This was one that I was really excited to read because we're following this woman named Sage Collins and she leaves her career behind as a data analyst to pursue her dream of becoming an author and a writer. And then one day when she's on this plane, she meets this guy named Theo Sharp and she doesn't know at the time that he's this like really big actor. And so then of course when people see them on this flight together, they start to assume that she's his girlfriend and so they kind of get into this mess of a situation where like she didn't know that that's who he is. This one also does partially take place in Scotland and this was such a wild like roller coaster of a book because I think when I first started this book, I thought it was kind of slow to get into, but then after we got about 100 pages into it, I started to really get into it. I was really loving and shipping the romance so hard between like 100 pages to like 200 pages into it. But then the third act of this book just really fell apart for me again and I really didn't care for like the final third of this book. So I was kind of all over the place with this. Like at times I was like, I don't care. And then at times I was like, I'm obsessed. So I have mixed feelings on this one. It only ended up being a 3-star for me. I also ended up reading this novella called 7 Points. And oh my gosh, I had no idea that this existed before the month of December. And this one actually just came out because if you know, one of my favorite books of this entire year was Crash Test by Amy James. And this one, the novella, is actually the follow-up. It's almost like a sequel to Crash Test. And it kind of talks about what happened with this couple right after this book ends. And because I'm so obsessed with, you know, Travis and Jacob, I just had to read this and I had to know. And unfortunately, this one only ended up being 3 stars stars for me. Like, I thought it was fine. I thought it was kind of like unnecessary, to be honest, to have this sequel. I mean, there were some things that I really loved about it. I just loved getting to like read about these characters again because they were definitely one of my biggest ships of the entire year. So it was really fun to like visit these characters again. But I also just didn't really feel that compelled by this novella, and I didn't really see a reason for it necessarily. And I also thought the last epilogue of this book was kind of strange. I don't know. I just didn't really connect with this as much as I thought I would. And then another romance that I gave around like 3.5 stars to was Love Me, Stalk Me. This one was described as being perfect for fans of Lights Out, which ended up being so true because I was a pretty big fan of Lights Out. It was definitely like a guilty pleasure of mine, but I don't think I loved this one quite as much as I enjoyed Lights Out. But if you're looking for something like silly, stupid, and it's kind of like more of a dark romance like Lights Out, then I do think you could enjoy this one. In this story, we're following this woman named Izzy. She has this like really awful boyfriend at the start of this book. Like, he's just the worst. And so instead of dealing with her awful boyfriend, she decides to start talking to this AI boyfriend, which I typically would not be interested in a book about a girl chatting with like an AI boyfriend because ew, AI. But also the reason why I think this one was interesting is because it's actually not an AI boyfriend that she's talking to. It's actually this guy Callahan that just got hired for her company as like cybersecurity, and she doesn't know that she's actually talking to him because he's hacked her computer, and she's actually not talking to the AI, she's talking to Callahan. And so it's definitely a bit of a dark romance because of that, you know, situation. But God, there was something about the way that this book was written. It was so much fun. It was so entertaining, and it was actually very lighthearted, all things considered. I loved the chemistry between Callahan and Izzy, and I just thought that they were so cute. But this one was very entertaining, and it was like the perfect thing to like distract me from all the things going on in my life this month. Another 2026 arc that I read this month is The Storm by Rachel Hawkins, and this one's also going on sale in January. Rachel Hawkins is a thriller writer that I will always read her new releases because there's something about the way that she writes thrillers. We're following these characters who are living in Alabama, and they're living in this place that is known for these deadly hurricanes. It's kind of cool because we're following several different characters in this book, and we're also following several different timelines. One of the main perspectives that we read about in this book is this character named Geneva, and she's the owner of this Rosalie Inn. And then there's this story about how this like true crime writer is going to be coming to stay at her inn because he's going to be writing a true crime story about this young girl named Lo Bailey, who is one of the local girls in town who was accused of killing her lover, who is this political golden boy named Landon Fitzroy, during a hurricane in 1984. And so what I like about this book is that it is so atmospheric with like the hurricanes and like the beachy vibes. I love how like the hurricanes kind of like tie into the mystery of the story. I thought that that was pretty unique. And I love that so much of this book includes a lot of mixed media because you're reading about, you know, like the true crime book that he's writing, and you're also reading a bunch of emails and like different articles about what happened. So that was really fun, but I also think the mystery ended up being pretty disappointing for me in the end. And there was nothing about this book that really wowed me. So I only ended up giving this one 3 stars, but like this was such an easy thriller to binge in like one afternoon. And I think it is something that you can have a lot of fun with. I also ended up reading the book All Wrapped Up in You, and this one was a really short Christmas romance. It was one of those like Amazon short story novellas. I was interested in reading this one because it's Rosie Danan, who is like one of my favorite romance authors. And this book was just fine. I don't know. It was very short. It was only like 50 something pages, and I don't have a lot to say about it. But the love interest, the guy in this book, he's a doctor, and then she's a stand-up comedian. So like that was kind of a cool, you know, like pair of characters to read about. I liked reading about those jobs. It was interesting. And I kind of like the setup of this book because they don't know that they're neighbors. Like they're like basically next door neighbors to each other, and it's kind of like fun, cute, quirky. But like honestly, this one was pretty forgettable because it was so short. It was only 50 pages, and I never got that invested in their relationship. And then another one that I ended up giving 3.5 stars to was Heart the Lover by Lily King. And I am glad that I read it because I didn't realize until after I read the book that this is actually from the same author as Writers and Lovers. So I have read a book from this author before. This one's kind of more like a literary fiction book about this woman, and we're reading about like her time in college where she was really getting to know these 2 guys and kind of how it like impacted things in her life. And this is the kind of story that takes place over many decades. I don't think I emotionally connected with this as much as I was hoping to. Like it only ended up being a 3.5 for me, even though I feel like a lot of people describe this one as being like very emotional, and like I could see why. I just never felt that emotionally connected to it myself, and I think it was because of the writing in this book. I don't know what it is about this author's writing style, but I feel like she does a lot of like telling instead of showing, and so because of that I just really struggled to feel like emotionally connected to any of these characters. And then this month I also did continue on in the manga series of The Moon on a Rainy Night. These are volumes 3 and 4, and I've really been enjoying this manga series a lot because this is kind of like a young adult romance manga series series that's following these two young girls. One of them is hard of hearing, and it's just so sweet and so wholesome. I actually enjoyed volume 3 though more than volume 4 because I think I gave volume 3 4 stars, and then volume 4 I gave around like 3 stars because there were some scenes in this one that I just didn't really care that much about. It felt like it was more about like their school choir than it was about like their friendship and like their romance. But this is a really cute series and I can't wait to continue on with it. And then moving on to the 4-star books, I had so many 4-star books this month. One of the 4 stars I had include Moan by Junji Ito. This is one I was able to check out from my library, and this is the new short story collection from Junji Ito, and I love his manga short stories are like some of my favorites. I think the short story that's called Moan was probably my favorite in this entire collection because that one was so trippy and so weird. I'm like, where does Junji Ito get his crazy ideas from? Like, I'm just really obsessed with his style. I also ended up reading Mate by Ali Hazelwood. This one is actually the sequel to Bride, and I was kind of nervous to read this one because I wasn't the biggest fan of Bride. I mean, I gave it like a 3 out of 5. I thought it was fine. But this one I ended up enjoying a lot more because this one's taking place in the same world as Bride, where we have like the vampires and the wares. And in this particular story, we're following this girl who finds out that she is the only hybrid of like being half human and half werewolf. And then the romance in this book is between this woman, Serena, and this guy named Cohen, who is the alpha of his werewolf pack. You know, I really wasn't sure if this was gonna be my thing because I didn't even know if I liked werewolf romances like this. I feel like anytime there's been a situation where it's like reading about vampires or reading about werewolves, like I'm always more drawn to vampires, but I actually really liked the way that this book was written. I thought it was so entertaining. She's just so good at writing good banter between characters. And then I also just like loved some of the writing in this book. Like there were so many little twists in the plot that I didn't see coming, and it just really like kept me flipping the pages. Like I read this entire book in one day, and this was a long audiobook. Like this was like 14 hours long, and I got through it like that because I just couldn't put it down. I also gave 4 stars to Best Offer Wins. This one is a new thriller that I thought was so entertaining because this one is about this woman who really wants this very specific house. And I feel like this book has a lot of commentary about like the current, you know, housing crisis in America and how like nobody can afford a house. But I feel like this book just took that to like the next level, and it was just so entertaining. Like I love thrillers like this where you're following a character who starts to get really obsessive about something, whether it's like stalking another person or just like figuring out what they want and stopping at nothing to get it. And I feel like this character was like a little bit of a mix of both, you know, because this story is definitely about how like she desperately wants this house. Her way of going about it is to like start to become obsessed and starting to like low-key stalk the couple that's currently living in the house. It's like she's trying to get closer to them so that by the time it goes on the market, they'll be like, oh my god, we're friends. Like, of course we'll let you have the house. It was just so entertaining. It had really great commentary, really great characters, and I loved the writing in this so much. Like this definitely scratched my itch where I was really wanting a thriller that was just really fun and engaging and like hard to put down. And I feel like this had all of the elements for me. So I really had a fun time with Best Offer Wins. Another thriller that I just read that I'm so excited that I can highly recommend is It's Not Her by Mary Kubica. And this one is actually an arc that I had on my Kindle. This one's going on sale in February next year. I basically just like went crazy on NetGalley one night in December and I started like requesting a bunch of things on my NetGalley, and I got approved for this one immediately. So I just dropped everything and started reading because I was really like in the mood for a thriller that was gonna like keep me hooked. And I feel like Mary Kubica is an author in the past that has done that for me. And I'm so happy to let you know that this one was so good. In this story, we're following this woman named Courtney, and right at the start of this book, she's kind of like out on this trip with her family. They're staying at these different cabins that are like right next to each other. She goes over to her brother's cabin in the morning and she sees her brother and his wife brutally murdered, and their teenage daughter Reese is missing. And so you're kind of trying to figure out like what could have happened. And what I really like about this book is that you're following 2 perspectives and 2 timelines. So you're getting Courtney's perspective in the present day as this is happening, but then you do get Reese, their teenage daughter, you get her perspective a week before the events happened. And there was just something about this one. I loved it. I was so entertained the entire time. I was pumping out all these different theories for what I thought was going on. The reason why I gave this one 4 stars though instead of 5 stars is because I did see the big twist coming, or like the main twist in the book. I was like, okay, that was kind of obvious to me, and I personally thought it was like a little bit weak of a twist, but then I feel like this is the kind of book that has a lot up its sleeve because there was more going on that I didn't see coming. And also like the final chapter of this book actually blew my mind. And I just love when a book can do that. Like I really appreciate when a book can have that like final gut punch and that final twist that you don't see coming. I also just have to give this one 4 stars because of how it made me feel while I was reading. Like I've missed that feeling of like just feeling so engaged by a thriller, and this definitely had that for me. So I definitely recommend checking this one out when it comes out in February. This book was so fun. Another 4-star read that I had this month was Battle of the Bookstores by Ali Brady. I really enjoyed the setup of this one quite a bit because we're following these 2 bookstore owners who are working right next to each other. They work on the same street, and there's just a little coffee shop that exists in between their bookstores. But he is the manager of this romance bookstore called Happy Endings, and then she is the manager of a bookstore that's kind of more like a literary fiction bookstore. But there's this guy who comes in and he ends up buying both of their bookstores, and he lets them know that after 3 months, he's going to be merging both of their bookstores into one huge bookstore, and they're going to have to figure out which one of them is going to be the manager. So this is very much kind of like the hating game where like they're both competing for the same job. But I loved the bookstore vibes in this book. Like it was just so cute because they would both be hosting these different like bookish events like in their bookstores. I also just ended up loving both of their characters so much, and I love the way that the romance was written between them. Like the chemistry was just so cute. I feel like this book was very like self-aware, and it was definitely one of those books that like reminds you, you know, like why you love reading to begin with, because there's so many cute conversations about books in general. I also really loved the end. Like, oh my god, the ending was so memorable and so unique and so cute and thoughtful. And then I did have a lot of nonfiction books that I gave 4 stars to this month. One of those being Your Favorite Scary Movie. Thank you so much to my friend Casey. Just recently sent this off my Amazon wishlist, and like honestly, as soon as I got this in the mail, the audiobook hold came in from my library, and I was like, okay, this is perfect timing. I'm gonna jump right into this. And I loved this so much. And I think if you're a big fan of the Scream franchise, I think this book is so entertaining and so interesting because this book talks a lot about like how the Scream movies came to be and like all of the effort that went into getting these movies made and all of the decisions that were happening like behind the scenes. I've been really enjoying nonfiction books like this that are kind of like talking about a franchise that I really enjoy, because it reminded me a lot of the like I Was Feeling Epic, you know, like the Vampire Diaries book that I read earlier this year. And you know, the ironic thing is that Kevin Williamson is behind both projects. Like he's a big creator from the Vampire Diaries and Scream, and this book also talks a lot about how he was working on both projects at the same time. I just feel like I'm such a nerdy person where like I want to know all the technicalities of like what was going on behind the scenes while they were writing these movies, shooting these movies, filming them. I want to know about like the different obstacles that they faced when filming these movies and how they overcame them. So I love when books like this really get into like the nitty-gritty details of it all, because that's what I'm so curious about. Like I want to hear about the casting process. I want to know about all the different things they were facing on set. I think this book was especially interesting though because, you know, Wes Craven, he was like the director of the first 4 Scream movies. He passed away after the 4th movie, and so I feel like there was a lot of discussion in this about like where does this leave the Scream franchise, or like how do we move forward and should we move forward. I just loved a lot of the conversations in this, and I thought it was so interesting. So if you like Scream, I think you would really enjoy this one. I also ended up reading this nonfiction book that's written by Josh Mallerman called Watching Evil Dead: Unearthing the Radiant Artist Within. And thank you so much to my friend Autumn for putting this book on my radar, because I had no idea this book existed until like a week ago. I listened to this one on audio from my library, and you know, I keep saying that I think Josh Mallerman might be like my #1 favorite horror author. I just really love his horror books so much, and so when I saw that this book was a thing, I was so excited because I love reading nonfiction books like this from writers that I really admire. I just love hearing people talk about their love for writing and like their love for stories and their love for horror. It was a very short one, you know, like the audiobook was only like 4 or maybe 5 hours long, but I love that this book almost felt like kind of like a stream of consciousness, because this book is literally called Watching Evil Dead because it's a lot about how he just really loves Evil Dead and he has such a big passion for Evil Dead, which no, I've never seen, by the way. And I know that it sounds crazy to read a book about this when I've never seen the movie, but I feel like this book was also not about Evil Dead necessarily, but it was like the concept of watching something that you love and sharing that thing you love with someone that you love, and how magical that can be, because a lot of this book is about him talking about showing the movie Evil Dead to his fiance who had never seen it, and like how special it is to share moments like that with people you love. But I also loved the discussion about writing in this book. It honestly like really inspired me to like want to get back into writing like myself, which is like the best feeling. Like I love when a book can like encourage me to want to do that. But I do love the way that this book was kind of like all over the place with like his thoughts about writing and like the success of Bird Box, and how instead of focusing on like what's currently trending in the publishing world, like he just writes about what he feels most inspired to write about. I loved the discussion in this book too about like what's more important, like selling more books or keeping the passion for writing books, you know, and like how to balance that and how to navigate that feeling. It was just really good. It was really informative. I really enjoyed this one a lot. And then another 4-star nonfiction book that I had this month was this one called Have I Told You This Already by Lauren Graham. You know, I just finished watching Gilmore Girls for like the first time ever at the start of December. And so after finishing the show, I immediately jumped into reading a lot of the nonfiction books from the cast members. And this month I was able to read 2 books from Lauren Graham, and this was one of them. This was the one that I ended up not enjoying as much as the other one that I read. I feel like there's something so comforting about Lauren Graham's voice. Like her voice is just so familiar and just so nice to listen to. But I also loved, in this one specifically, I loved a lot of her commentary about, you know, Hollywood and what it's like being a woman who's aging in Hollywood and what it was like, you know, for her working as a young woman in the 90s on a lot of different film sets. I just really love her commentary, but I also love her humor. Like she is freaking hilarious, and there were so many moments that would just make me laugh out loud. I listened to this entire audiobook while I was driving down to my friend's house, and I just had the best time listening to this. All right, and then moving on to my 5-star books, my favorite books that I read this month. So speaking of Lauren Graham, one of the books that I gave 5 stars to this month was Talking as Fast as I Can. So this was the first nonfiction book that she published, and I think this one published back in like 2016 or 2017. And this was the first one she published right after Gilmore Girls A Year in the Life came out, which if you were wondering, I did end up watching Gilmore Girls A Year in the Life, and I do have an entire TikTok talking about all of my thoughts on that. So I'll have that TikTok link down below if you wanted to hear my thoughts on that show. But I wasn't the biggest fan of Gilmore Girls A Year in the Life. Like it just did not feel like the show that I know and love. But anyway, this was so fascinating because this is the nonfiction book where she really talks about like her experiences on Gilmore Girls and like how it felt to play a character like Lorelai, who she just felt so connected to. And because I'm such a huge fan of Lorelai Gilmore, like she's definitely my favorite character on Gilmore Girls, it was just so nice to read this, especially because, you know, after finishing a show like Gilmore Girls, it's definitely one of those shows that like it feels like it leaves a hole in you. Like it's definitely the kind of show that gives you like a show hangover. Like I was like, what am I gonna do now? Because I just got so attached to these characters, and so reading this book immediately after finishing the show was just like a warm hug. And it was so nice to hear more about like her childhood and her story. And like Lauren Graham has such a fascinating life story, and like her childhood was so unique and so interesting, and I just love her like quirky humor. I love the way that she brings that humor to this book. It was just so great to read, and so I'm really glad that I read this one. And then also, speaking of Gilmore Girls, I also read The Third Gilmore Girl by Kelly Bishop, and Kelly Bishop is actually the one who plays Emily. She plays Lauren Graham's mother on Gilmore Girls. So it was really nice to read both of these books back to back. And both of these were both 5 stars for me because they were just so well done. Like these are exactly the kind of things that I want to read about when I'm reading a memoir for somebody. And I think Kelly Bishop's was especially good because I often find that in a lot of these like memoirs that I'm reading, they'll only want to like talk about like the great parts of their life or like the parts that make them look amazing. But I kind of love that in The Third Gilmore Girl, I love that Kelly Bishop just like really lets us in, even with things that she was like, yeah, that was probably a mistake and like I never should have done that. But she's so like honest and so vulnerable and like so real. And I also think Kelly Bishop just has such a fascinating life story. Like I had no idea that she started as a dancer on Broadway. Like I just loved learning about her early life, and I loved hearing her talk about her experiences on Gilmore Girls and like all these different things that she was dealing with behind the scenes. It was just so insightful, and I just had such a great time listening to this one. And the audiobook is narrated by Kelly Bishop herself. Like God, if you're a Gilmore Girls fan, you have to read both of these. Like they were just so good. Another 5-star read that I had was my reread of Julie Chan is Dead. I know you're probably sick of me talking about this book, so I'll keep this very brief because I already did a live show with my sister, by the way. I will have that live show linked down below, but we just had a full-blown discussion about this because it's my favorite thriller that I read in the year of 2025, and so I had to reread it before the live show. And I'm so glad that I did because it just reminded me why I love this book so much. This book is just so unhinged and ridiculous in the best way, and I just love it. I talked about this book in my best books of the year video as well because this one ended up number 4 on my list. So if you want to hear me praise this book nonstop and get all the details for why I love it, I will have that BookTube live show linked down below. And then lastly, my favorite 5-star book that I read this month has got to be Next Time Will Be Our Turn. And this one actually also made it onto my best books of the year video, which is crazy because I just read it in December. But this is the kind of book that like I read this and I knew immediately that it was going to be an all-time favorite of mine. This one is this beautiful sapphic romance story. We're following this young girl named Izzy, and she goes to her family's Chinese New Year celebration, and then her grandmother, Magnolia, she shows up with this woman, and the whole family is just like baffled and like disgusted, and Izzy's starting to feel like ashamed because she's also starting to feel like maybe she could be queer herself, and I think her grandma kind of like sees that in her, so her grandma sets her aside and she tells her this story about the first woman that she ever fell in love with when she was a teenage girl. And this is just so freaking beautiful, like so stunning. And something that I love too is that all of Magnolia's chapters take place between like 1995 and 1998. And I love this book for so many reasons. I mean, I loved reading about Magnolia in the 90s and like her experience being a Chinese Indonesian young girl living in America. I loved the romance in this book was so wholesome and it was so sweet. And then also like the ending of this book just absolutely like stepped on me, broke my heart, made me cry. It made me so emotional. I will have the vlog link down below where I read this one because oh my gosh, this was a lot. But I also just loved it so much because it reminded me of like The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. It reminded me of The Notebook. It reminded me of How I Met Your Mother. This one just reminded me of a lot of different things that I really, really love. So it was so special to get to read this book this month and I will never forget these characters. All right, those are all of the books that I read in December. I know this was like the most amount of books that I've ever read in December. It's actually really cool because since I just finished reading all of the books for December, I finished up my stats page for the end of the year. And so I have all of my stats done and that's going to be the next video that I'm posting after this one. So definitely stay tuned for that because I have a lot of fun doing the stats at the end of the year. But anyway, those are all of the books that I read in December. Please let me know if you've read any of these books. What are your thoughts on them? Also, how many books did you read in December? Did you find any new favorites? If so, let me know in the comments. And like I mentioned, my next video is going to be my stats video. It's one of my favorite videos that I make at the end of every year. So I hope that you can check it out. And thank you so much for watching as always. And I'll see you very soon with another video. Bye.